welcome to Other Lands Editing Podcast, where two speculative fiction writers and editors help you craft fantastical worlds by keeping an eye on exacting editing and foundational writing principles. Every 2 weeks, we bring you interviews with other writers, advice on editing and writers' craft pitfalls, and reviews of popular media to help you grow. So sit back, relax, and join Margaret Bates and Midnight Boss as we discuss all things writing and editing. Hi, welcome to the Other Lands Editing Podcast. You're here as usual with Margaret Bates and Midnight Boss. And today we are looking at fairy tale adaptations. And we did this by contextualizing it with two modern-ish in the last 4 or 5 years movie attempts at adapting fairy tales. We are pretty familiar with Amazon's Cinderella and the most recent Disney's Snow White live action musical. So hey Midnight, how you doing this week?
Okay.
All right. I think part of the push of this episode was your brainchild because you definitely suggested we should watch it. I know because in part
Yeah.
the Snow White has
Because
been so talked about.
because Snow White, I mean, you heard about it for so long before it even came out, and then it came out, and I didn't realize it had come out. And then a few months later, it's out on streaming, and like the reaction to it has been wild to begin with. It was interesting to me to see people reacting to it once it had come out on streaming because no one, so few people who had reacted to it at the beginning were people that I actually followed because they just didn't go. So I guess that brings us into the concept of like adaptation and fairy tales of why do we get fairy tales adapted so often? And part of it has to do probably like with copyright and the fact that you can put out a billion retellings of Beauty and the Beast or Snow White or Cinderella or I don't know,
Hansel and Gretel, if you're super into it.
if you wanted to do a wide shoes Hansel and Gretel, you could do that. Is that it's very variable, and there's this perception that these stories are timeless and that you can do whatever you want with them and it will resonate with people. I don't think that's necessarily true if we look at these two specifically, because they did not resonate with people.
No. And I was going to say, this is the daughter of a lawyer, sister of a lawyer hat on. And this is not a copyright thing at all, because I'm not an expert on that. But one day maybe we'll have a talk with copyright. But I will say that when you're redoing fairy tales, you do have to be very careful because the regular Grimm's version or like the Perrault version of Cinderella or whatever is the original folklore version is free to reuse, free to use those story beats, those ideas, that kind of like trope or theme or even some of the plot beats. But the second you name your Sleeping Beauty Aurora, that's literally the Disney version, and then the House of Mouse is going to send you a cease and desist. So just be aware of when you do a fairy tale retelling as a side note, make sure it's the fairy tale original anodyne version and not the version Disney has been able to copyright and put its stranglehooks into. All of a sudden, if your Belle has a golden ball gown, you might be in trouble. But I think you do have a point that people like to reuse it, not just because they're material that you can reuse and put your spin on because they're out from other copyright in the same way you see Pride and Prejudice came out with zombies or other types of romance books that are retellings of Pride and Prejudice or let's have the sapphic version, etc. But I think there are parts of these stories that are really timeless. And for my part, it's A, because they're stories we hear when we're small and
Yeah.
when they're foundational for us in understanding how stories even work and the power of story in that case just to literally be bedtime stories when you're that tiny and get you to sleep but also get you thinking about things creatively but also and I'm going to go with this especially if you go to the original Grimm's or Hans Christian Andersen version of The Little Mermaid too, they can be bleak and in ways they can be types of reflections of or even morality tales that are perspective or giving you recommendations. And I think there is something to be said about simple overall morality tales that get passed down and reiterated from generation to generation. Because on the other side of folklore, and again, a different part of discussion, for a different episode is that you see that often in American folklore with a lot of those sort of scary stories and what we see now in the digital age with creepypastas. But there is something very universal and that humans get interested in, I think, is a broad species thing of let's tell these tales, let's simplify them a little, let's have some sort of moral or nugget at the end that we tell, or even with Aesop's fables, which are distinct. Those two things I think come into the timelessness of the stories. Why do you think that they're timeless, or why do you think people still stay so interested in fairy tales?
And I don't think that they are timeless. I think they have the perception that they're timeless. And some of the things that you refer to do touch on something that people will continue to respond to. So, like, there are elements to these stories that like scratch the id, and then it could have been a different story, though. If you have something where, okay, this is something that's frightening or uncanny, then that comes into the story and it comes along with the fairy tale as the model. But I don't think that they're necessarily timeless because the morals change over time. So the morals of certain things with, say, like Little Red Riding Hood, of you can interpret that of beware of outsiders or beware of falling into these certain traps or misbehaving in certain ways, but the literal message of being afraid of the wolf is not the same. And when you take the fairy tale of that one in particular, take it into the French context, becomes very sexual. So the message changes with the times, but you can make use of the story elements and the visuals to strengthen your own story.
I think that's fair. And you're right. Obviously, if you're literally telling a story in this early 1800s in the deep forest of Germany, be scared of wolves is very important. Kind of makes you think there's a Red Riding Hood equivalent of be terrified of spiders in Australia. And I think that also brings the point is if these stories or these morals are the main sort of touchstones that identify a story as a Cinderella story, identify a story as a riff on Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, etc., and they can sometimes become outdated or transliteral adaptations can become dated, right? What are the keys to having an adaptation that's successful or one that is a good homage versus one that falls flat and isn't well liked, as obviously the Amazon Cinderella everybody already forgot is,
Thought it
and
existed.
as Snow White was just lamented and bashed. But both of those we could say are safely not successful adaptations of fairy tales.
So, when it comes to talking about adaptations, I have done a workshop on this in which I likened using an adaptation to building a house, and that you need to make sure that you have the basic structure, the bones of the house, like what is a load-bearing wall versus something that you can take away. And then there has to be some kind of heart to it, that like it needs to mean something. And then finally, you need doorways, you need your way in. So, if we look at these as a set of questions, what can't be taken away without it making it
No longer.
unrecognizable? How far can you go from the original fairy tale and people still see this as the original? So if I gave an example of Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass, I think that people would not recognize immediately that that was in her head as she was starting supposed to be Cinderella, because the story is about an assassin who's brought to the palace to do a game show to compete to become a guard. So it it deviates so wildly that there's glass involved and there is a ball, but I think it would be hard for people to track that onto that, as opposed to A Court of Thorns and Roses, where it's very obviously a Beauty and the Beast retelling, because you have the roses in the title. You have
Yeah.
the beast, he literally turns into a beast. You have her dumb little sisters. You have her father who's useless. She gets taken away from her home. And there are things that are changed, but there is also a curse that she has to break. Not that she knows it for 75% of the book, but that there are a lot of the same structural elements that are there. So you know which one is playing off of it, and it makes it very recognizable. In addition to that, it needs to have some kind of emotionally resonant message. What's necessary to make that resonate with people it can't just be an empty retelling for it to be successful. There needs to be some kind of message to it.
Yeah. Like I
Trying to
think it
think
needs
of
to
what,
find a way
yeah.
to be like, how does this audience coming at the material today in this generation get an emotional through line when it was easier to do it? Like the Snow White movie we'll get into more, but like I think the way the animated film was situated in 1937, it was the first of its like kind, and it was at that time when you're in the Great Depression and the audience wanted to be transported through new media. And then you have one that's an iteration, but how do you get people to care about this iteration just to even put their eyes on it or to engage with it? But then how do you make that story relevant to today's audience where it's like we've already seen a very simple version of this archetype. Why is it something I want to engage in? I will say I did adapt a fairy tale, and I don't think of it as like a typical kind of adaptation, but I was in a box set once and I co-authored a story called The Golden Stag with Megan Hussey, and it's not a very common fairy tale. There used to be this animated fairy tale show on either Nickelodeon or HBO when I was small, and so they'd burn through the typical ones pretty fast. So you'd get the rarer ones like Snow White and Rose Red isn't even that rare, but they got to ones like The Golden Stag, which is basically about because they usually are like a brother and sister whose father, who's the king, dies, and their evil queen stepmother banishes them to the wilderness. But while they're wandering, her brother drinks from an enchanted lake and it turns him into a fawn, and she has to find a way to save him, and then it involves him almost getting hunted by the current prince of the land that they've wandered into, etc. So when I adapted that, I didn't want it to make it quite a literal fairy tale where they're still set in a medieval Europe setting. So both because it's an obscure fairy tale to begin with that most people don't know, and because the way I translated it, so to speak, was to set it as a very odd alternate history, ultimate universe noir, where it's a very paranormally endowed world where people didn't realize paranormal creatures were a thing until World War II kind of blew the lid open and all our interaction in the United States with Europe. Whatever, table that. But it's my way of saying it was a noir, but the main beat is this woman stepmother has abused them and put a curse on her brother who is been turned into like a shape-shifting fawn. In this case, a big old stag is an adult. Know where he is. So her whole journey alongside her sister is to find a way to locate her missing brother and undo the curse on him so he's no longer just stuck as a stag. And so that's technically the same plot line, but I think as a recognizable fairy tale or as one that's very close to the original beat, it's not perhaps a success in that way. But I think for me, it made me have a chance to take that story that people don't know and introduce the idea and the kernel of the plot to it, and then gave me a springboard for creating a different type of noir world and play and speak in a time and a type of time period and Sam Spade style story I hadn't before, but with something that was interesting to play with. Yeah, I can see how if you read Throne of Glass and it's starting with whoever's going in to compete for this position, and you're like, this shouldn't start with someone who's down on her luck or she's poor. If you had a Cinderella type protagonist who's literally some kind of in servitude and trying to get out of it, it'd be more relatable. Or like how you see the difference between ACOTAR and Throne of Glass and the obviousness of its source material or homage can really vary.
I would say that for the one that you're describing that you wrote. Now, I wouldn't say that this doesn't make it a success because it's not recognizable, because the reality is that have different rules for fairy tales that are very familiar versus ones that are not as familiar. So, when we're talking about adaptation, we're usually talking about people adapting a fairy tale or a story that people are familiar with, and that for that reason, you can bank on these emotionally saturated images like the rose or the glass slippers or people's original feelings about the characters, and you can play with that. But with the fairy tale that you're looking at, you still have these frequent commonplaces to fairy tales that allow you to evoke a sense or a feeling rather than the specific tale. And I think that gives you a lot more leeway while still having that fairy tale feeling of the stepmother is a frequent fairy tale character for reasons. I imagine it's the feeling that the stepmother is going to want her children to inherit instead of something else, or to find or deal with your stupid missing brother. Of I'm thinking of the Baba Yaga story, which is wild of the girl who has a relationship with Baba Yaga's daughter, and something happens to her brother. There are two or three where something happens to the brother, and the girl has to go find or save him. Even going to Hansel and Gretel. These are commonplaces too, fairy tales that you can touch on and use, even if the story isn't as familiar as the other ones. You just have to think about it in a different way. That the emotional hook in isn't as easy because people aren't as used to it. But at the same time, people aren't as burned out on it. Maybe sometimes people get tired of seeing the same story over and over again.
Yeah, and that was a motivation because, like I said, it was originally put in and it hasn't been revised yet, but for its own solo establishment. But it was put into a box set, so other people claimed like the easy ones, or this is The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast. But I was interested in doing one that wasn't as attended to. So I will say it has that double-edged sword aspect of people don't know it very well, so I can use some of the plot line threads of it. Then I have a lot of more leeway to play with it and change and make it my own because no one's expecting, well, you didn't to be super like banal about it. Like you didn't have a talking candlestick, which is obviously more a Disney thing for Beauty and the Beast than not. It's not like someone was sitting there with a chick list of, well, it's not like this version of Snow White I read or this version like the movie. So there is that kind of give and take too.
Also, if you are looking at a particular culture's lore, like if what culture does the stag come from?
It's one of those like lesser known Grims, so it's actually Germanic.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe not in that case, but if you were interested in fairy tale lore in general, you would have that. But also, there are sometimes you can say this one is a little closer to pre-unified Italy lore or Irish lore, and from Asian countries, their mythology. And if people are interested in that kind of mythology or that lore, then that might be a draw
Yeah.
in the same way that you would have, not in the same way, in a different way than you would have with somebody just recognizing the story because Disney did it at one point.
Yeah,
So,
I just edited an anthology, like line edited, that had different tales of mermaids. It was like mermaids mixed with horror. So some of them are more literal siren-esque interpretations of leading people to their doom. And one of the better ones from that drew almost from that siren side and like curse and that idea and things that go also and tied in with feudal Japanese mythology and ghost possession. I can't remember exactly the plot line, but it was using that East Asian influence and their take on like curses
yeah,
and ghosts and what could be in the sea. And that was engaging to read. It was really interesting to use that as that through line of that more sort of ancient way to reflect the tale,
yeah.
both tale and tale. So pun ahead. But
So
so
that kind of takes us into why are you even writing this story? So for our last little thing from the metaphor of the house, what's your way in? Are you writing this story? Why now? Is there some kind of current exigence for creating this story? Does the message connect with something that's going on right now? Or is it that you read this story or are aware of this story and you wanted to do your own take? You were captivated by it, or maybe you're angry with it. You can do that too. Maybe for some of the common fairy tales, people get tired of certain parts of it of why did they do it this way? This doesn't make sense. Let me do my own version. And that's important to have your own kind of drive with it to make it your own.
why does she have Stockholm syndrome? Which is something you always grapple with when you do the Beauty and the Beast retelling. Like, how much agency can you give the beauty character? How much do you get to play with that now that we understand more about hostage situation trauma? But I know what you mean. Like, why now? Why this version? What are you trying to say with it? Why is this the book you're writing? And the flip side of that, and I think that also brings us to these adaptations, which we can talk about a little bit more now. Um, Sometimes people, I know with Amazon and Disney, respectively, they did their Cinderella and their Snow White because they were either cash grabs or to get on a trend in Amazon's case, I believe, personal opinion. And then Disney's case, the original film of Snow White came out in 1937 and it's been a long time. So I feel like they felt like with, I believe, their live action Dumbo too, they have to make some kind of iteration of that to retain the copyright for the next 70 years. So there's definitely monetary reasons to do this, but I think it was more in both cases monetary override and plot or characterization, or let alone this is a story that whoever's helming, so to speak, the ship of the production really felt they needed to tell right now. So there's a lot of passion lacking, especially in Cinderella, and it felt like I just like money. And sometimes I think writers can be like, well, have that FOMO problem, the fear of missing out. And you see maybe a lot of other people are doing a fairy tale adaptation or a Greek myth retelling or adapting beats from superhero things without getting close enough to get sued by Marvel, whatever. But are you doing a fairy tale retelling because you really are super into the Ice Queen's tales from Scandinavia and you want to put a spin on it? Or is it just because Frozen made a lot of money and I'd like to make money too? Because then I think readers can tell when your heart's not in it and it's not something you
Yeah.
wanted to do, but you felt you'd jump on a bandwagon.
It doesn't have to be your heart's song, but like you have to at least care enough about the story to put something in it. As I would
Yeah.
say for both of these movies we're about to trash, structurally, they do have the bones of the story. I did see, like, this is one of the reasons that I thought about doing this podcast because I saw someone that I follow, I haven't watched this thing yet, say, did they go too far in their changes? And I would say no, is that if you're going to make certain changes, you need to actually justify its existence. And I don't think either of them really go far enough in making it their own story. So, no, they have the parts there. You recognize it as the story, but it doesn't have enough there to say this iteration is worth actually watching. As you point out, neither of them really need to exist apart from money or copyright. So, if your main goal as a writer is fairy tales are really hot right now, romantasy is everyone's cup of tea right now, that's fine. But you need to find the heart song within you. Why do you want to tell this story? And what can you make of it that's uniquely you? Because there's so much noise out there. You don't want to be the next person to put in a copy of a copy of a copy, because then who cares about that? You want it to be something that people can attach to that's yours, that they want to follow you for, if that
Yeah, I
makes
agree
sense.
with that. Let us tell a little bit about each of the films because I guess people have maybe heard of them, and by this point, no one remembers Cinderella. Um, do we want to talk about Cinderella and explain it plot wise? Or I'll explain
Yeah,
Cinderella and you can explain Snow White. So I'll do Cinderella and break it down a little bit first.
sure.
Okay. Cinderella, it has Camilla.
Camilla Cabello,
Yeah, from Fifth
and
Harmony,
produced by, yeah, she's from Fifth Harmony.
which is a girl
And
was a girl group or is.
she had gone, let me just say. So came out in 2021. The Cinderella character is played by Camila Cabello, who came from Fifth Harmony, but she was going solo at the time. So this is where we're finding her, and then we have James Corden producing, which is why you have to deal with his character. So that's where they're starting with him.
Yeah. Um, he was very famously in Cats, and it was a
And the
lot wrong with
prom.
Cats. Yeah, but Bustopher Jones was not a good part of an already terrible film. Wasn't like a small saving grace where at least you get to see Idris Elba gleefully yell "McSpitty" and disappear. Anyway, basically in this Cinderella, I guess Cinderella is a girl boss, and her goal is to make money by starting her own kind of seamstress shop and making luxury dresses for wealthy lady clients and things like that. And that's literally what her I want happiness. This is my what I need to do song is about. We'll explain a little bit more about that when we get to musical formats. But her big desire is to make cool dresses and be a independent merchant, essentially. There's an extended cast. There's obviously a stepmother who is played by Idina Menzel, who you may not know by name, but if you're a theater nerd, she was the originator of Elphaba on Wicked and obviously was in Rent. She's the singing voice for Fro, and she's Elsa. So you've got the stepmother, you got the sisters who kind of are there, but they kind of disappear halfway through the film. You've got the prince, of course, and he's got a family with a lot of drama going on with his dad is a jerk, and his sister is actually much more capable and smarter than he is and would make a great ruler, but she's a girl, so she has girl cooties, so she can't be ruler cause. And then the king and his wife are kind of having marital problems, and yada yada. And then there's like a town crier. So there's race blind casting a little bit for some of the ancillary or like secondary roles. So it feels like it's trying to modernize some stuff up with a little bit of Hamilton inspiration. But if you see town numbers in the chorus, and if you see the fabulous like drag godfather or fairy godmother or whatever, that's Billy Porter, but he's the narrator and he's in it in like the fairy godmother scene, but he's really underutilized. And I'm already starting to say it that it breaks down. You're like, well, there's this character there and this character there. Yeah, it's the story of Cinderella, but there's a lot of subplots or meandering subplots or characters who get introduced and you think they're going to be at least secondary characters who are close friends with the hero and his friend in court, but you only kind of see him occasionally. I forget his name, or her stepsisters, but you don't really have them have scenes with Cinderella very much after the first couple of opening scenes, and you don't see much resolution for them because they don't get storyline. So things you expect might happen where, oh, they're the stepsisters. Maybe they'll be more developed this time. We'll get a spin on. No, or like, oh, the stepmother must have a motivation. Oh, we get it, but it's like 75% through the movie. So it's trying to get into this Hamilton niche, race blind casting for the general cast and chorus, redoing it's a jukebox musical, so the songs are mostly picked out pop hits except one, I think, and shoved in place. So it's got modern music. So it's got a lot of things going on. But and I'm sure you'll jump on this with me too, Midnight, that it feels like it's too much going on.
It's too much and not enough.
Yeah.
It's just, do we want to analyze this or do we want to go ahead and talk about what Snow White is and then,
Yeah, we'll do Snow White and explain what that is, and then we can talk about them each if you want to. Yeah,
yeah,
but
okay.
given that Snow White
So
overview.
Snow White just came out, had a lot of fury around its entire existence every step of the way. And so it came out in May, maybe? I don't know. It for all the fuss about it, they didn't advertise when it was coming out very well, and they didn't advertise that it was a full musical. They showed the one Whistle While You Work song a little bit in a minimalistic trailer, and I think that was a huge mistake to not let theater nerds at least know that they might want to take a look at this. It is a full musical, as it starts with a group musical song for the town and the king and queen and daughter, and then there's an I Want song and a villain song and a stupid song for Prince Robin Hoodie. And so it's all the way through. The main story as Snow White goes is exactly as it was before with a couple of added things. Snow White had a very nice life with a very good king and queen, and the town loved them and all was well. But then her parents died, first her mother, and then the king, for some reason, married a woman who might be an enchantress. We're not super clear on that. But once he dies, she decides that she's going to be a complete dictator and be siphoning everything from the people so that she can have all the things and be beautiful. And that's it. So years later, Snow is basically a servant in the house. She meets the prince who is stealing from them, and he gets captured. She lets him go. And then the queen finds out that people think that Snow is prettier than her, so she sends a huntsman to kill her, but he doesn't for some reason. And then she runs off into the scary, scary forest, meets some dwarves, they sing some songs, and then she meets Robin Hoodie again in the forest with the resistance, and some things happen, and then they come back and take care of the evil queen who subsequently destroys herself somehow. So you have the basic story going on, but then not a lot of connection for why things have to happen. Have I left anything out?
No, and I think even listeners, you're trying to navigate the tsunami of exposition from both of us respectively, you might have noticed that between Virat's Wicked Queen of I just like being pretty, I'm pretty, gotta be the fairest, and the Amazon version Cinderella, I'm gonna girl boss and make dresses, you're like, well, these motivations seem both very limited and how do they fit into the greater story as I know it of how Snow White goes or how Cinderella goes. And I'd be like, you're correct. Across both iterations, both types of attempts at adaptation from each company, I feel like a lot of work was not done for character motivation and it really shows. And that's one of many weak points. But in both cases, even trying to explain in a very thumbnail way the motivations of major characters is difficult because they're clearly not very deep and thought out, but there also sometimes don't really seem to fit the rest of the story,
Yeah. Snow
especially with
White of
Cinderella.
the entire, like between the two, Snow White has the clearest character motivation from the beginning, but they muddy it. So from her I Want song, you can clearly see that she wants to do more for the kingdom. She feels like she's been waiting because she was literally a child when this all started. She wants to do more to be a good ruler, to help the people, but she can't. So that's her tension of what she wants to do. When I say it gets muddied, later on they introduce the idea that the king might still be alive. They don't do anything with that. She thinks that she needs to go find him, but then she dies because of Apple or sleeping curse. And then she wakes up and says, My father is dead. We knew that to begin with.
I guess
So
when you have a apple coma, you learn the secrets of the universe, so that's how she figured it out.
they
That's
could have had at least a line where I talked to my father while I was asleep, and like I saw him in the afterlife.
no,
They could
they
have
did
had a
not do that.
scene where she's in the afterlife with her father and him like encourage. They could have tied that up, but I think in the third act they were like, "Oh wait, we introduced this plot. Let's tie it up with a line. He's dead." Okay, that screws with her motivation, as does the prince. I'm calling him a prince, even though they're not saying that he's a prince because he acts very entitled. So, for someone who is living in the woods and acting like a pseudo Robin Hood, Timu Robin Hood, he acts extremely entitled. So he shows up and then he antagonizes her because he's a terrible person, and then turns out to be the leader of the resistance, at which point he almost dies for her. She saves his life. And then they have a song where they fall in love with each other, and suddenly she wants to be with him. And you could have that sense.
That's
This is
developing
the
over
first time
time.
you could have had it develop
Yeah, you
over
could
time.
have gone for
They
that.
had the ability. Let's talk about that in a second. Let me finish my thought. Of For her motivation to be with him, one, it would have been nice if they had allied some time there, but more than that, they could have connected her want to do something for herself with her previous want to do everything for the people. And so they could have used that song or her story with the prince to work in with that, to resolve that. As is, she feels like an incomplete character because they haven't really gone into depth of she's at the palace and she wants to do everything for people. She's with the dwarves, she wants to do everything for people. She joins the resistance, she wants to save the people. And then suddenly she wants to be with the prince. It's unconnected, but it doesn't have to be. If you didn't know
Yeah,
the draft,
and I think you feel like I do, where the heroines in each story are set up with their own goals for their own reasons, but because fairy tale and because adaptation, because eventually Cinderella marries the prince, and because eventually Snow White marries the guy who kisses her and wakes her up, which in this case is a prince, he's doing more Robin Hood kind of stuff, running around in the woods and like trying to defeat the queen kind of guerrilla style. But he obviously is the Prince Charming of this piece. But either way, they both have their own goals and they're not marrying them with, oh, yeah, they also literally want to marry the princes, but it's because it's Snow White and that ends with the prince waking her up and everything getting happy again. And that's the marriage is part of that deal. And same with Cinderella, where she literally cannot change station in life financially without his marriage. But their goals don't match that. Feels like that force, well, this is an adaptation, so this has to go there, but we're not going to work to actually accommodate it.
if you compare that to The Little Mermaid, and I know that some people didn't like this because of wah wah wah, but the way that they married Ariel's original want to her want to be with the prince resolve some of the complaints that people will complain a lot about Disney movies because they deal with things simplistically, and the complaint for The Little Mermaid is she sold her soul to be with a guy, and that's the original story. But if you look at Ariel in particular, she wants to explore the human world, and that connects with the prince Eric because when you get them together, she can continue to explore the world. He wants to explore the world. Their goals unite. And so you can see that developing. Even his I Want song allows us to have that happen. But when you have the Cinderella and Snow White here, their goals with the prince's goals don't
Align.
it doesn't align at all in Cinderella. It's a mess in Cinderella. In Snow White, it could, but the prince is so underdeveloped and quite frankly irritating that it doesn't gel the way that it could. There's
Yeah.
promise there. You could do it, but you would have to give him a real song.
So I
And
think
Princess
one thing
Problems is not a song. It
that
doesn't work.
we're hitting with is A, motivations, and if you have to keep elements from the original fairy tale, like they get married in both cases, you have to make that work with the version you're telling, and they didn't do those two things. And also, the third thing I think we're both hitting on is underwriting some of the characters. And sometimes they have so much going on with subplots and sub characters that they've got so many that they haven't really done the thing where you go for parsimony and reduce so the few you have as like secondary characters get enough focus to feel fleshed out or real or have real relationships with, or don't basically have so many subplots going on that all of a sudden there's no heft or weight or emotional relevance to what should be the main plot. Like in the Cinderella version, I'm sure when we get back on ping pong you to Snow White, you can talk about poor Dopey. But in the Cinderella version, because you've got these other threads of like, well, the prince's father and mother are having marital problems, the king's kind of become recalcitrant, so laws are the way he says they are, and he's not listening to anyone else. And you got the side plot of his sister could be a better ruler, and she wants to rule, and all of her ideas are like, hey, how do we feed the peasants better? And it sounds like she should be queen right now, honestly. Like regicide's an option. And then it's not a subplot because technically Cinderella is the main character, but half of her time is spent getting to the ball and stuff. But a lot of her goals and the things she does, like once she's at the ball, she meets a queen from a visiting land to sell dresses to, and then she has to get to the port in time to show her dresses off before the queen returns home to maybe become that queen's royal. Like her motivations become their own kind of subplot because they're not, like you mentioned, unifying her towards the prince there. And it just all feels disconnected. And honestly, I don't really care about the king and queen's drama. I'd have wanted to see more about the princess's struggle to want to become a good ruler while her brother is a guy who farts around and goes and like hunts foxes because he doesn't want to have responsibility. So all this kind of stuff. And then we keep not even mentioning the wicked stepmother and Cinderella of all things when she's such a supposed to be, by structure of the original story, such a pivotal character. Because while she has a banger song, she does, she's a banger villain song. They don't build her up or use her in a lot of, especially the first two-thirds of the scenes. Like you don't see her interact a lot with Snow White one-on-one. Her daughters kind of disappear like 30 minutes in, and you really don't see them. All of a sudden, the stepsisters aren't even in Cinderella anymore. All this stuff happens, and then by the time you get to about in the final third, the final act, her banger song, and you realize that the reason, in part, the stepmother is so hard on Cinderella isn't even jealousy or want for her own daughters to succeed, but in part is also long ago she had an original first husband and she had wanted to be a concert pianist and she was really talented. And I guess when she was able to even go to conservatory, by the time she got back, her husband just wanted to leave her and left her destitute for a while. She could remarry with Cinderella's father. So she knows that if you're a woman in this time and place with a goal that isn't reflective and convenient, essentially to the patriarchy and to becoming a homemaker, then you can be left destitute and high and dry. And so no matter how talented she is as a concert pianist, it's never going to happen for her. And so, yeah, she's projecting and she's hard on Cinderella. But at the same time, one of the reasons she's hard on Cinderella is because she knows you can't have dreams of your own because as woman, as womb, as usable commodity, you're not going to get to live them. And that would be really compelling. And Dina Menzel is an amazing actress and it's a really great song, etc. Except it's not seeded or really interwoven at all until you get to the song. So it falls way
Yeah,
flatter
it
than it should.
happens. They give you the backstory right before the song, which is stupid. She's almost an afterthought until that point of like, why is she so mean? She's actually not that mean until she grabs Cinderella by the ear and takes her somewhere. So she should be meaner sooner. And you do see her making her daughters do things because of this reason. So you have lightly the sense of she wants everyone to get married. So we get that, but we don't have enough sense of her early enough to develop that. And I was just telling you before we started this that I think that they should have given her villain song earlier and used that to set up her dominance in the household of controlling all three of the sisters and making them handle what this is. Stop complaining. I don't care. you have to do this, you have to learn this. And so if you set that up early enough, then when you give the backstory of she's like, I understand that you have these dreams, but I also had dreams and it's just not feasible. And I love you guys too much to let you suffer this way because you will be destitute and die. So that they could have set that up in such a better way, but it's very haphazard. And I don't think that they care enough about the stepmother that much. I think that they gave her that depth because it's Idina Menzel, and you don't just throw her into a musical and not give her her own song
Yeah.
unless you're in Enchanted, which is what
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah, but I also think that's part of it is because they have so many characters, side characters really, they can't do any justice to the ones who are technically secondary supporting characters, but should have weight and feel real enough to make any type of emotional impression. This movie's like popcorn, not even good popcorn. Like, no offense, but light popcorn you have to have without the butter because you're looking out for your heart health. Like
and it's a little
you,
burned.
you, yeah, you eat it and then you forgot you ever had it 5 minutes later.
The
It
people who
happens.
reviewed it trashed it and then moved on, and no one ever
Yeah,
references
no,
it ever
no, yeah,
again.
exactly. Like it's just Jetsons food pill paste of the 21st century. You eat it and move on. Like it's forgettable. And the thing is, if you had spent less time, I'm sorry, Pierce Brosnan, I like you in a lot of other things, but like giving random character development, kind of, if you squint to the king who sucks. Hey, this is Cinderella. We need to focus more on the stepmother and her conflict with Cinderella because that's supposed to be the main antagonist arc of this entire thing. Like they just make odd choices where they kind of don't make any, and everybody exists and has some kind of half-hearted stab at a storyline, but so no one, even Cinderella, has a really cohesive, clear one of their own, so nothing matters because everything matters kind of problem. And you do see
Nothing
that's
matters
yeah.
because the conflict is resolved so easily. You're like, well, that's the law. Women can't rule. That's the law. Women aren't allowed to sell things in the marketplace. Don't get me started on the historical anachronism of that. But at the end, it's just like basically he changes his mind. So
Which
barely
is
an
the weirdest
inconvenience.
part because in Cinderella, the way it's set up is that the whole problem is Pierce Brosnan's kind of a jerk. Like he's apparently gotten in his old age where his way is the highway, which is he's the king. But then he just, has a little makeup essentially and says I'm sorry after his wife calls him on the carpet and he sings an embarrassing like warble at her to show he can still be embarrassed in public and he still loves her and he changes his mind and says yeah you can marry her but we'll just let my daughter be queen and everything's fine. And then when the prince, I mean, marries Cinderella, he'll help her travel the world a little bit and sell her wares, no conflict. So weirdly enough, in the story of Cinderella, they adapted the only character of all of them, including Cinderella and the prince, who gets character development is the prince's father, the king, who learns to let himself be embarrassed sometimes in public and to let loose and revise laws when they're no longer fair. He technically has an arc until rediscover love with his wife, and you would think this is a longer plot line, but it's told in chunks, but only in like maybe 20 minutes total, but enough to distract from other plot lines and weaken them. But yeah, the only character in that movie that has a emotional character arc or any arc at all is the king, whom we all remember in depth from all of our Cinderella retellings we've read or seen or remember from Grimm's to begin with. Am I right?
Yeah. Usually
It's
he's just there. They
baffling.
don't care about him and his
Yeah,
wife and
it is
their
a
marital problems.
baffling set of choices. And my final thing with the way I see Cinderella, and again, I think you'll see some of these threads in Snow White, the way too many characters or plot lines that compete with each other. I think this is a script that needed many more drafts, like at least two or three, because it has so many competing subplots. It needed someone to go, no, this is what we're doing. This is a vision for this. This is why we're doing it. We don't need extraneous subplot B and C. I didn't even mention the mice, and I know you have to have them, but we didn't need them to become annoying footmen and have scenes with them while she's in the ball, like figuring out that men have to there's a front tail and drinking or like eating or I don't know. It's stupid. It's James Corden. He was the executive producer. He had to be there. But all the time of like comic relief with the mice when they're footmen for the night is completely useless. But it just feels like there needed to be someone who had a main vision and like we had talked about earlier, cared and said, this is why we're actually doing this. Like, yes, money, yes, profit, yes, trend. Yes, we're a studio company. But also, this is my vision for this Cinderella. This is why I want to do it. This is why I want to tell it. This is where we're going to go. This is the lodestone. This is the guiding star. If it doesn't fit to servicing this overall story arc and character development for Cinderella, then we're not going to junk it up. And it feels like they had three or four different competing ideas and subsequent rewrites, but never got to a stage in the revision process or cared enough to where they made it all parsimonious and a whole and took away the subplots that just didn't work. Didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't
And
know
I
what those notes were because it was written and directed by the same person. So you would think it would have more cohesion than that. But I imagine that there were many notes that caused things to get distracted. I don't know.
yeah. But then
I
with
think that
Snow
this movie,
White, I mean, sorry, you were gonna say one more with Cinderella.
I was going to say, I think Cinderella would have done better if it had been made 5 years earlier or maybe 6 years later. With
Why?
again more drafts. The reason I say that is that they have literally two mashup songs in their dumb little jukebox musical. And so if it had hit at the height of Glee, it probably would have done better. Even if
Okay,
it was as terrible as it is, I think it would have done better if people were comparing it to Glee.
that makes sense. I see what you mean with that.
But you
But
can
I
talk
think,
more about the music later.
yeah, totally. And then to go to Snow White, I feel like parts I like the best about Snow White are ones that focus on Snow White as a character herself, her I Want song, her struggling early on in the castle, things like that, because Ziegler's a good actress and she's trying to elevate the material she's given. I think in a weird way, because once we get out of the castle and we start meeting the dwarves and meeting Prince Charming, we'll call him that, but again, he's very Robin Hood with his own band of freedom fighters slash merry men. Like you get more characters towards that side of it, and I feel
There's
like
so
things start
many
to
at that
dilute.
point. You have
Yeah,
all of the dwarves, and then you have the merry men and one woman in the forest, and none of them are very well developed. Dopey has a little bit of a plot, but it's not going to connect because they CGI'd the dwarves, which was a choice that no one forced them to make.
no one.
So that would have been good to see her connection and development with some of the individual dwarves, but you're not going to get there because she's talking to a tennis ball. And as we spoke about earlier together, as she has experience on theater, so her ability to imagine the scenery around her is great. And we know that she can do full musicals because of the ones that she's been in, literally. But the fact that she has to act opposite with seven CGI dwarves, and the dwarves aren't in it that much.
Yeah,
They
it's
have the
weird. They aren't.
moment where they do their hi ho. They have the moment where they do whistle while you work. She has a moment with Dopey. Then they bring Robin Hoodie back to save his life with Doc, who's not that kind of doctor. And then they're not really in it that much after that. And it's
And
because they're
Dopey's the
CGI, because
narrator,
they're
I guess.
expensive. He's the narrator. You don't have to see him.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
but we don't
cheaper.
get a lot along those plot lines and development of them individually as characters because you can't have them on screen that long. It's like they didn't learn anything from She-Hulk and knowing that the CGI is expensive, so you can't do it that much. Then we don't
Yeah,
know almost anything about any of the Merry Men. One of them
I don't
uses a
remember their
crossbow, but he
names.
doesn't have an access to one until the very end.
Yeah, like it's a lot going on. And I know the way the original framework of the fairy tale is set up, and even the 1937 movies, you have seven dwarfs. So even if it were just Snow White and the seven dwarfs, and Prince Charming in this iteration wasn't essentially an amalgamation with Robin Hood and had a merry men of his own, that you still would have seven characters, and not all of them would get focus once she's living with them in the woods. That's why no one can name all seven dwarfs off the top of their head. Can't happen. Um, but the one she does interact with, especially with Dopey, should have been something you could have more screen time between the two of them. Narrow that focus if A, you're right, he's a human, played by an actual living flesh and blood actor. So that way it doesn't cost money to have him on screen because you don't have to pixelate and animate him. And so that way she can interact with him because there is a subplot where, and Dopey is our narrator for a reason, he chooses not to talk. It's selective mutism around the others because he has a lot of anxiety and they make fun of him for it. And that's why he's Dopey. Unpack that as you will. But in that whole arrangement, eventually she sits with them, sort of helps him one on one with his anxiety, helps him realize he can find his own voice, which is why he's the narrator and has his little growth because she's inspired him. And that really does have the potential. I'm going to be honest, the way it's written, the way it is at least acted with the voice actor who's doing Dopey, I can see what they're going for, but because she didn't have a real person there and because it's too expensive to have her and Dopey have more than two scenes together, again, it's not laying the emotional weight in the seeds that you need so you get that payoff. And that's frustrating because it could have had payoff, but he's uncanny valley dude and it just doesn't.
I know they were always going to have the dwarves because, again, the reason they made this is so that they could keep IP on all of these things. But they really didn't need to have the dwarves or the other people in the forest. They could have picked one and developed that. So they could have had Snow White and the Merry Men or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but that's not in the title. They could have made some choices there. I don't think that you needed the prince to have his own ensemble
Yeah, that
following
never
him
made
around.
sense to me. And even if you're
It's
doing the dwarves, like you could have them opening musical number, but she mostly interacts with Doc and Dopey and maybe Sleepy because the others are in the mines all day. I mean, it just has so many characters that don't do anything.
since Sleepy has narcolepsy, I really would have liked it if he were just at the house doing things.
That'd be
To
so
give
funny.
some acceptance of his disability and do not put him in danger in the mine where he's literally going to die.
Fall asleep with a pickaxe.
It wouldn't even conflict with them showing up and she's sleeping in one of the beds. Maybe he was already asleep and he
I
didn't wake up.
know.
It would have been funny and cute. Anyway, so like they had some opportunities to parse down the amount of characters. It makes no difference, very little difference at the end whether you have the resistance there or not. If you're going to have the resistance, do something with the resistance, but it doesn't connect. And this goes to
No.
our complaints about the queen. It doesn't connect to the greater resistance against her authoritarian rule. So why is it there?
And her
I don't
authoritarian
know.
rule
To give the
is
prince something to do.
I'm pretty. You should like me because I'm trying to be the fairest in the land. I'm pretty. Like, okay, where's your, even if you don't intend to go through with it, like, I'll give you a chicken in every pot slogan. Like, if you're going to get people to be like, well, fascism is terrible, but at least we have more rutabagas to eat every night. She doesn't even do that. Her whole motivation is the evil queen is, I'm pretty, so I'm doing this for me. And I'm like, that's not going to get any human being ever to at least support you for a little while and go along to get along, which is why her motivations again baffle me because she's not even trying to hide them from the
She
subjects to
makes
try and
no
get
sense as a
buy-in to
character.
abuse them later. Like nothing about her makes any sense. It's very
What
confusing.
she rules through the power of the soldiers. So we need to see why the soldiers follow her. She could rule through the power of her magic, but we have zero explanation of whether she was actually an enchantress or not. We see her use some magic, but very little because
Yeah,
they're
very
sticking
little.
so closely. This is where I say that they could have gone further in a lot of ways. They don't really show her as a powerful enchantress. They show her turning herself into an old lady to trick the bitch with an apple. And if she's that powerful, she could have done made Snow White look ugly. Uh, isn't that an option? But and then she has this magic mirror, and it's unclear what it can do because at the beginning the narrator says it can only answer one question: who is the fairest of them all? And then immediately the next time we see it, it answers different questions. So they haven't really thought through the evil queen, who she is, why she's doing things. Apparently, it's just because she wants to be the prettiest. And if you want to be the prettiest and
You
most
don't need a whole
delicate and most
kingdom for
beautiful, you're
that.
not going to be cracking crabs. So I don't
You have to
know.
forgive Midnight. She's not a native Marylander. She doesn't understand the wonder of eating crabs at all times for all occasions.
I
But
love
fair.
crab, but I'm not doing it when I want to look elegant and pretty.
There is no bad time for crabs in Maryland,
With
and you
her
will look pretty.
manicure,
Anyway, I didn't mean to derail too much. And this is even aside from the performance that Gal Gadot gives, which is terrible because she's more there to look pretty in things. I'm gonna be super honest and be like a supermodel type who sometimes says lines and like act, and that's a choice. It's a shame because if someone were a better performer or actor or actress in that role, at least her villain song, even if the motivation doesn't make much sense, within the meaning of the lyrics, it would have been a really fun, kind of high camp number. Like you point out, like you get Bob the drag queen in there, or
Manila Luzon.
yeah,
I would still
someone.
say that if you brought in Idina Menzel or Lana Parrilla
Oh
in the,
yeah, Lana Perlin, that would have killed it too.
just
But
let her
it's
be the evil queen. She's the evil queen.
lean into it from once. Yeah, lean into it, just recast
Yeah,
and do
from
it
Once
again.
Upon a
Yeah.
Time, she was the evil queen, and she was scary from her very first line read. So,
Yeah. But even if you'd cast Lana Perla or Dina Menzel in that role, like a good actress who can act, it's not even, I mean, you could have put Meryl Streep in that role, which wouldn't be too dissimilar from her in Into the Woods, but there's just no there as far as a character motivation, who this evil character is supposed to be, that even Meryl Streep couldn't fix it. Like she could probably do a fun song, or Lana Parrilla could do like the menace from the lines as reading them, but there's nothing there for why is she having the ability to exert control over this kingdom? Because you're right, her magic she doesn't use all the time in a lot of scary ways, to, like make other enforcing soldiers out of stone. So if you don't get in her army, she'll just have those kill you first or whatever. But like,
and Once Upon a Time, she will literally rip your heart from your chest.
yeah, no, this one doesn't do that. She mostly just sings about I want to be pretty and I have some diamonds or something. It's very weird. Anyway, I just feel like both of these movies, as terrible as they are, share this DNA of we have too many characters, but we don't do enough with any of them, so none of them matter, even except for maybe sometimes our lead. And the ones we do have that you maybe get some screen time with don't have motivations that make any sense, or ones that like are cohesive with other motivations they pick up along the way. It both of them just fail to cohere because they're trying to do too many different things. And I think some of it is like probably symptoms of different drafts of scripts, but never really settling on a finalized draft. But honestly, and I mentioned this to you as the pre-show notes, like these both feel like movies done by committee. I mean, there's one director or one or two sets of credited writers. By WGA law, you can only have like up to 4 or 5 credited writers on a project anyway. But you get the feeling, and you mentioned it when I was talking about Amazon, like there's some studio notes coming back being like, can we do, and it feels like this soup of nothing.
Yeah.
And I guess books aren't made by committee, but there does feel like at least the one of those lessons from both of these adaptations. I don't know, it's just that you have to have certain things you're trying to do. You have to write with intent. And sometimes during the drafting process, things change and you realize what works or doesn't. But this, both of these reek of we're trying to please too many people. And so we're not pleasing anyone because this is slop, not about anything. And that I think is
Yeah.
a problem as a writer, because if you want to please too many people with your vision or do too many things because they're trendy now, but it's not really what the focus needs to be, then you create a product that's the equivalent of some low fat, unsalted, burned popcorn. And people might eat through it, think, yeah, it's okay, it's 3 stars, and they forget a day later it ever happened. And I think God help me, and maybe this will come back to bite me in the butt someday, but as a writer or even some kind of creative, I think the worst thing almost you can do is create art that is so soulless and empty that people forget it ever happened. Like if people hate it or they love it, at least they had some kind of emotional reaction to it. Again, asterisks, this never applies to that problem that keeps coming up in romances where some hero is forgiven because he commits a genocide, but we can rehabilitate him. That's universally awful. It should be hated. Don't aspire to that in any way. But I just feel like if you try to please too many people, you have too many voices in your head of I should balance X, Y, and Z, or I just need to hit on every FOMO trope so that way I'm hitting all the marks because, selling copies tells me to, then you end up making nothing. And I think that's scarier to make something that has no emotional resonance than anything else.
There was an option for Snow White to have more of an emotional revel,
Oh, yes.
as there is a message there, as that kindness isn't passe. Kindness is good, and you should try to continue to be kind and make things better, even if it's hard. And that's basically the core message. That's what Snow White is herself is trying to put forward, but it's not very strongly done because most of the time she's just being the den mom to other people or standing around. If someone's going to come at her with an arrow or a knife, she's going to stand there. So, okay, Snow. And then for the Cinderella, their message is basically
Girl
girls are
boss.
cool.
Girl boss.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. That's it.
It it's
So
even a
as well, this
palette
one has a
for
stronger
90s
message.
feminism.
Obviously, Snow White has the stronger message, but they don't do it well.
No. Which is funny because we, you know, rhapsodized a couple episodes back about loving Superman 2025. We're not going to rehash that, but check out that episode. But that movie is kindness is important. You still need to be kind. Being kindness is literally punk rock. And Snow White is really trying to go for it. When you have fascism, when you have cruelty, the strongest thing you can do is still be kind and still work to serve others because it's the right thing to do because it's what her parents taught her. And I will give the film credit in the early opening scene, the opening big chorus number. It's her as a child. It's not even Rachel Ziegler yet, but it's her as a child at 7 or 8, and her parents taking her out to the yearly festival to feed the townspeople with pies they've handmade themselves and she's made with her mother. And it's about giving and having a ruler who's brought up with that spirit of giving and serving her people. And the way the show ends is a reprise of that number at her wedding day, where the town festival, and it's again about service and being kind to your people. And that
Yeah.
both those numbers resonate for me, as does her I Want song, because you know what she's trying to do and you're with her as a character, but the rest of the movie doesn't serve a message that it really could have.
And I think for the songs, as you mentioned, that first song does a lot of heavy lifting. It does a lot of good things that a musical should do, is it
Yeah.
aligns time between her being a child and her being an adult because it shifts us through that. It teaches us all about what the kingdom was like before. So if we're looking at our little narrative mountain, we're getting the sense of stasis as things were before the change. And so it allows us to do multiple things. It has those, I keep forgetting that term that you use, where you double or triple load the scene, where you use those things to show us how tight the kingdom was and what the people are like, and then what the royalty are like, and what Snow has learned, and then introduce the image of them by the well, so that when the queen goes away, you can have like, oh no, feeling in your heart. Um,
Yeah.
so it does a lot of good things in those opening parts for the musical, and like we've both said multiple times, her I Want song does the thing the I Want song should do. It lets us know where she's headed, what she's aiming for, what her motivations are. And it's also very well sung because she's great. So
Yeah,
compare
I
that to
wanted to
Cinderella.
yeah, I wanted to jump in and be like, we keep saying the word I want song, and I feel like I wanted to define it a little bit because we're moving on to the musical side of the musicals.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge expert on musical theater. I was in some plays in high school. Obviously, I watch a lot of musicals, blah, 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 blah. But the way musicals are traditionally structured is because you have usually one main protagonist or one who's the more focal of the bunch and get you in space and time. You usually have an opening number. It's the big chorus number. It's the big number here in Snow White where it's her life before. The animated Beauty and the Beast, it's when Belle walks through the town and the entire town tells us how odd Belle is. So we know what's going on before she goes to the castle. The I Want song is pretty much ubiquitous in all musicals. And even if you, as a listener, don't know it because you've been told the term. Since we've all grown up on Disney musicals, we all know what it is. It's like the song, usually second in, where it's just the character singing a solo and saying, "This is what I desire. These are my goals for the course of this play." Since because musicals are a different medium than a book, it can't be internally thought by the character. They have to sing it. So you all know an I Want song. You all know I Want to Be Part of Your World from The Little Mermaid. That's kind of like
Yeah.
the banger of all I Want songs because when I was 5, every little girl sang that for like 2 years on the playground. It just is. Or if you want the Book of Mormon, where he sings about how he just wants to be an amazing missionary, etc. Like they are all pretty much out there. So the I Want song in any musical is supposed to be where the heroine, the hero, the they, whoever is singing about why they're motivated and what they're trying to achieve for the rest of the runtime of the musical. And in Cinderella, whew, I think again, don't quote me, that it's just a Camila Cabello song.
No, it was written for
Oh, was
the
it?
musical,
Oh
and she
no.
co-wrote it with one of the people on there. Well, an interesting thing is that Adina Menzel's song and Cabello's song, they co-wrote their own songs.
That tells me a lot. That makes sense. Dina Menzel song's really good.
Take that with what you will, because Adina Menzel's song is so much better suited to being a musical song.
This is true too. So I guess this also weaves into the idea that for all its faults, and we'll talk about a couple, or at least one other song in Snow White that doesn't work because I think you just want to tell us eventually about the Prince Charming song. Snow White's an original musical. It has songs that are incorporated and taken from the 1937 musical with Hi Ho and Whistle While You Work, obviously, because those are classics and Disney's like retouching the IP. But all the other songs are originally written for those characters and for that musical. Whether they're successful or not, depending on who sings them or depending on what's in the lyrics, is debatable. But it's an original musical. Cinderella is not, although I thought maybe the Camila Cabello song was one that had been a single at first. She was jamming in there. But by the structure of most of Cinderella, it's what they call a jukebox musical. And the term comes basically from, I don't know if people are old enough to remember these, but back in the day, if you had like a soda shop or like the pharmacy where you go get your malted or whatever, they'd have a rockola or like a machine that you would just press a button and it would play a song because it had like records inside. And a jukebox is what it was called, or a rockola. And the reason it's called a jukebox musical is because you create the play and the structure and the writing of it around set songs you get the rights to. One of the more famous ones that was very successful, so much so that it got one or two sequels, is Mamma Mia. And that's all ABBA songs that were hits by ABBA. And then the play itself and then the film is the first film is constructed around the ABBA hits. So the songs came first. There's one that's all around 80s hair band that I watched that is as awful as I remember it, called Rock of Ages, same deal. If you see a lot of TV shows when they do their musical episodes, not all, I see you, Buffy. I also see you apparently Once Upon a Time, it's original. Most of them do jukebox musicals because it's really hard to write 35 minutes worth of original songs just randomly. It just is. But you see it more and more on Broadway lately because having a jukebox musical, I think they have one that's like based on Michael Jackson songs, etc. They do it more often on Broadway because again, you get the captive audience of the fans will come see it. But you got to write the characters and the arcs and the storylines around pre-existing material, and the fit doesn't always work very well. I'm just not personally a fan overall of jukebox musicals. I've seen some work better than others. But in Cinderella's case, even though the I Want song and the villain song are co-written by the actresses and singers of them and are actually endemic and created for the musical, the fact that the rest of the musical is just kind of let's put in a pop boogie hit here or there to make a pop boogie song, it's not very good.
No.
But like it's just poorly structured. And so what happens is you have things like the prince just sings a rendition of I Need Somebody to Love, which is also a weird choice because it's in Ella Enchanted. So it makes you think of a better Cinderella movie while watching a crappy one. But but basically what ends up happening is, or they have that mashup later of Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes and I Want a Man, One Mighty Good Man. It
That's the
just
one that
means,
makes me think that this has some Glee vibes to it,
yeah.
is that like that's something Glee would do, is they would just take two songs and be like, let's just make them work.
Yeah, because maybe they have a similar beat and it sounds cool, but so I think what happens is even if the two supposed to be most emotionally resonant songs are original, because you're also filling in a lot of the heavy lifting or supposed to be of the rest of the musical from songs that pre-exist on their own and don't really have anything special or tied into the character, it falls flat. Like, for example, if you're trying to get in the prince's head with his I Want sort of song or his riff on that, I mean, I need
His
somebody
I
to love,
Want
you're
song
having
is
a
so
ball.
diametrically opposed to Cinderella's.
Yeah, it
Like he
is.
just wants someone to find him somebody to love. And I will give them credit that some of the songs that they chose do kind of fit in the circumstance,
Very
but
true.
because the lyrics don't really fit, I'm left not entirely understanding what I'm supposed to be feeling at this moment other than kind of bopping along with the song.
Like the opening number for like the general, this is our town and this is what we do, and this is the singing chorus. They have a
Yeah.
herald from the king who raps and like sings, so it's a literal chorus in that way. Um, it's Rhythm Nation by Janet Jackson, and I don't know what the motivation of putting that in there is. Like, it's a pop hit, it's fun, it's got a like up tempo dance. Like, I get that aspect of it, but I don't know why that song, as opposed to another '90s hit, as opposed to like setting the scene of this is our town and we just do our
That
town
was
stuff.
also a mashup too with You
Yeah,
Gotta Be, which makes
yeah,
it worse actually for
it
like
does.
focus.
And it almost makes it feel like then Cinderella gets one and a half I want songs. So she's the only one singing You Gotta Be as she's doing her chores. But then three
Yeah.
minutes later, she sings her Camila Cabello original song about I want to be a girl boss and make money. Essentially, well, if I'm going to be like a hit, it's a million to one shot or something, but it's the same idea. And
Gotta
so
take my shot.
it's, and then the final song isn't really a reprise as much as a Gloria Stefan song or
Yeah, they
something.
just sing Let's Get Loud.
Yeah, and again, it's like we need a big number so we can have our big dance troupe dance in colorful outfits. So you get a sense of the village being lively as a beginning and an end, but they don't do anything else. Like if you compare it to the Snow White opening numbers, which are the original number written for the show, one is the beginning, it's the opening, it's this is how our kingdom is. Well, we're happy with the king and queen are still alive, and we have Pie Fest, and our king and queen want to take care of us. And then the contrast is as a reprise at Snow White's wedding to Prince Charming, and now the continuity of a good ruler is back. We're happy again. It does a job. It lifts the load. It shows this is how the kingdom has been. This is how, after our struggle of the movie, it's gone back to being, and its good is restored again. When you start the movie in Cinderella, because it's a jukebox musical on here's our happy dancing town in Rhythm Nation, here's our happy dancing town to Get Loud, you're like, okay, except for things like I Need Somebody to Love, I'm not exactly sure sometimes why they chose the particular jukebox tune they chose, except they could get the rights to it and it was probably popular and they figured people would enjoy the music.
Yeah.
So that weakens the storytelling because I think we're not musicians or musical theater people who are professionally trained in any conceivable capacity. But I do think one thing you take about when you look at and dissect a musical is that whether it's jukebox, which I have my own preconceived feelings about, or original, just like when you're writing a book and you have scenes and chapters, the songs have to do loads, so to speak. They have
Yeah.
to
They
carry
have
double
to.
duty. That's why it's called an I Want song. It's not just she's singing prettily as Snow White. It's like I'm laying out what my motivations are for the rest of this story so you can see me evolve and succeed or fail. Or
And
I'm a villain, and here's my villain song.
at the same time, so let's just talk about Snow White. For her I Want song, it's showing her motivation, but it's also showing the shift to where she is now, right?
Hmm.
It's that she used to be here with the first song, and then the second song, she's got her fuck ass Bob and is the servant. And
It's a
there's
plot
a
bob
plot point for that. It's a plot Bob because she makes her cut her hair.
to
Just,
look
that wasn't
less
her
pretty and
choice.
less fair. It's like evil stepmom abuse, so it's a plot bob. It's supposed to look terrible.
Yeah, it's
But
meant to be terrible.
and
So that
even
compare
within the
that to,
original, yeah.
sorry, what?
I was gonna say, but even within an original musical, you can still have songs that are not
Yeah,
helpful
that
or like
don't do
don't do
that, they don't
things.
carry their weight. Like, what is this? Why is this here? When we watched the Grinch musical when you were staying over in Houston, it was the worst musical I've ever seen because every 2 seconds they have to have a song where they say the same thing 3,000 times
It just
of
felt
like,
like
we're
I
going
need a
shopping.
song now.
I want things. We're going shopping. And then they have the Grinch singing of like, I hate them. Don't ask me the reason. What's the reason? Tell me the reason. What's the reason? The reason is stop singing. This is bad. So the songs need to do something, but they're not just there. So even Hi Ho, which had to be there because they wanted to keep the property,
Contractual
the rights on
obligation for intellectual property reasons.
it.
Not a
If they
good
wanted to
reason.
keep it there, at least you get to see all of the dwarves as they come in, and it indoctrinates you to watching the CGI monstrosities, and you get used to them a little bit during the course of that song.
It does soften the blow to see the Uncanny Valley when at least it's a song I know from when I was a little kid. Admit it does make the slop go down a little easier, but it's they still look weird.
I maintain if they had just cast a variety of actors who were at least as tall or shorter than Rachel Ziegler, then it would have done the same thing, and then we would have been in a better place. But the song does what it needs to do. The Whistle While You Work has less to do, but it could have done more. So, like, I think in general, the songs of Snow White are good with two exceptions, but the Whistle While You Work should have done more to elide time
Yeah,
because it
because
feels
everything
like she
happens
was in
real
the woods for
fast.
an afternoon
It feels
or
like a
something.
week, maybe, or like 3 days, and you're like, wow, a lot happened in 3 days. My goodness.
That was one crazy
I know
weekend.
you want to talk about, was it Princess
Oh
Problems? I
God.
know you want to mention that one before we sort of wrap up more, but
Yeah.
yeah, Princess
Um,
Problems is ugh.
If we had to cut a song, I would absolutely cut the Prince's song because the Prince's song is not an I Want song. It is just a song where he's antagonizing her and basically calling her entitled for wanting to fix the kingdom, which is nonsensical in multiple ways. Like, as far as it's fit, it doesn't fit at all because he has seen her being used as a servant in the castle. She saved him by letting him go. So he knows that she's not just a pretty little princess. He knows that. Also, he's like leader of the resistance, Prince Robin Hoodie. So why is he singing about why it's better to be selfish? It feels like they were trying to write him as Fiero or something, and that was from a different draft. So
Yes.
it makes no sense. It makes him incredibly irritating. And it's also a terribly composed song that we have compared to early South Park goofy songs where they just wanted to write a stupid song and it's like it's so dumb. It's worse than the Scuttlebutt song from Little Mermaid, which at
I can
least
see
I
what they
can
were
listen
trying to
to
do
it.
with Scuttlebutt. Yeah, this one just felt like derp
That
derp
one's a
derp
song for
derp derp
kids.
derp 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 derp
It's
derp. Like it just sounds
it's
like
stupid and it makes me respect the
placement
prince
royalty
less.
free music that just has a bop. Like I feel like I could get it from like I don't know, a screensaver doodly doo back in the 90s.
Cut that stupid song and develop the character some more. Just for
But,
God's
but it gives
sake.
you care. Yeah, it feels like it's from an earlier draft and they just didn't want to change the lyrics or cut the song
Or
because
they
he's
thought it would
mad
be
at
so
her,
funny for him to
but
antagonize her and basically like call her
but
spoiled, which makes no
but
sense.
dude, she saved your life from the evil queen by getting you out of prison because you were caught breaking the so you know she's not like that. So it creates like a continuity issue in a 2 hour movie, and you're like, did they miss the first 35 minutes of their own movie? This is weird.
They may
Um,
have. Maybe they also wanted the romance to be sort of like enemies to lovers, but one, they don't have enough time
but
to
you
do
didn't
that
structure
because
it that
he
way at
immediately
first.
gets shot and then they fall in love. So within the course of a day, it's resolved. It's not really enemies to lovers. It's like this guy is an asshole to the suddenly they're in love. And it's not satisfying in that way, especially when you had the chance to introduce him early and create that continuity of like she knows him.
It's a mess. I
Yeah,
guess as we
need to wrap up though.
work to sum up for sure, and this is how we structure it when we were doing the pre-show notes and discussion, but it's a good question. Of the two, of Amazon's like 2021 version of Cinderella or the Snow White just came out and it's on Disney Plus, which is actually the worst film of two not good films.
I'm going to argue that Cinderella is just bad, as that there's more potential for Snow White and therefore it is a better movie because there's more things that are working, even if they needed more drafts, more attention, and more care. It's there. You could do something with it. But Cinderella, the lead, you should at least be able to be the boss on your own song that you wrote for yourself. The
That's a choice.
motivations don't match the conflict. It's just a mess. And the effort to rebuild that film into something that works would not be worth it, really, in my idea. What are
I
your thoughts?
My pitch on Cinderella is, do we need to do the Cinderella story, but can we keep the world, hear me out, with the jerk king and his wife and his son, who's kind of a lazy loused about, and it's actually the story of Princess Gwen, who wants to be the monarch because she has good ideas for her people, and she eventually falls in love with her brother's suitor, who's another no business queen across the land who also has access to a sea monster that will make her father, the king, happy, and everybody will be united in two kingdoms with a sea monster where the peasants get to eat. They don't waste taxes on catapults. That's my pitch, but that basically jettisons 90% of the film and makes it no longer a Cinderella story. But I would watch the heck out of that. I would also love to meet the sea monster and enjoy sea monster time. He could be the derpy of this movie. I'm just saying.
Maybe
I
Girl Boss Cinderella could run away with them and be their dressmaker or something, because that's what she wants to do. She wants to
Yeah,
leave and make
goal
dresses.
fulfilled. Goal fulfilled. You're
She
dressing
kind
two
of likes the
queens.
prince, I guess. Um,
Yeah, two queens who need their dresser going around and them and their sea monster. Make it happen. It'll be better, Prime, I promise.
yeah,
My feeling is just
God.
uh, between the two, and I'll talk about it in a second more, but I get angrier and more disappointed with Snow White. So for a while, I thought, okay, if you judge by how disappointed you are in something or frustrated with it, then Snow White's the worst movie. But you're right, on a fixable scale, and there's some bones there, it could be salvaged. Snow White is by far the better film. And Cinderella, there are a couple of cool songs. Like I do think if you'd restructured it legitimately and not for my sapphic like sea monster queen story, but if you really wanted to do something with it, there is some interesting, compelling motivations for the stepmother. That's a great song. You can build something with that, with really deepening that conflict and making, like you said earlier, you've got on the upstairs, downstairs side of it, the upper class, the queen and her daughter really have a better quality of life because they're in that echelon, but they have no real power and they're in a gilded cage. They want to exercise power, especially Princess Gwen. She wants to be better for her people and have her people have a better life, but she's a woman. And then the flip side, you've got the stepmother and Cinderella. And the stepmother has wanted to be better and to be a concert pianist and have dreams. And Cinderella wants to have dreams and have her flourishing design industry. I'm not being sarcastic. Everybody needs to have a dream and a business and something they want to have in life, and that's hers. So good on you. It just doesn't match marrying a prince. But there is this upstairs, downstairs, no matter where you fall as far as financial security as a woman at this time in the society, patriarchy has you by the throat, which really is the theme of the stepmother's song, which is a really good song. And there's something you could build from that if I'm gonna be honest, you had a better singer and actress as the lead for Cinderella, and you invested in scaling back the characters, so you focus on the Queen and Gwen and their struggles against the patriarchy, reinforced literally by someone who's supposed to love them with the king, and also at the same time how that trickles down to even poorer case with how it's locked Cinderella and her stepmother into roles they don't want, and in response to that, the stepmother hasn't become someone who tries to help Cinderella, who thinks essentially by abuse she can help Cinderella, and it's all kind of poison the well because of this stricter gender norms hierarchy, which would actually end up, however you try and resolve it, but you narrow that focus to those four women most affected and hurt by it, to reinforcing their feminism message better than I'm going to be a feminist, very white feminism, 90s girl boss. As long as I got mine, I'm good.
And that's the
Weirdly
problem,
enough.
right? The I got mine part of it, and that it's really resolved because patriarchy decided to give you a few privileges, is that what's really missing from that message is any kind of sisterhood between each other, is that they're not really working together ever. And
Literally,
so
her stepsisters are just jettisoned, and usually, especially because you've had of all things direct to Disney DVD sequels, and I know there's one or two where the direct to DVD sequels in like the 90s focused on one of the stepsisters getting redeemed. Like I kind of expected one of them might become a better person, or the first time I ever saw it, get more involved in helping her sister. Because one of them, I think Malvolia, is written to be a little sympathetic to Cinderella and stuff, but literally those characters are so little used and disappear halfway or a third of the way through the movie, then you don't have sisterhood because of connections between the characters. You take away sisterhood that's usually foundational, though warped in the Cinderella fairy tale, and delete it. It's very odd.
the queen doesn't even really talk to her daughter. So
No,
we're completely lacking that kind of cohesion that would actually make their little girl boss message fly, because it's so incoherent, partially,
it's
but also
facile.
because that they're not really, yeah, that's it, is that they don't think that deeply about it. They want the surface level of girl power, but not actually developing what that means and the concept that you actually need to work across class lines to face injustice, which would be, even in a silly jukebox musical, would be that deeper thread that would make the story work. You need
You
some
remember it
substance
later.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you'd
and
remember it later.
I believe the people who reviewed it at the time, if you asked them about it, they'd be like, they'd remember one small stupid detail, like James
James Corden.
Corden's giant's head on a mouse body,
Yeah.
something
So
that
yeah,
traumatized me.
I guess that's the difference. Like Cinderella is a worse film because you have to do a lot more to debone it and try and fix it, but also because it's so empty and vacuous and so lip service girl boss feminism with no substance that you can barely remember you ever saw it. Snow White has parts of it that make good impressions, and mostly is Ziegler's performance and some of the musical numbers that were the ones written with care. So it's more frustrating, but I think it's more fixable. And I
Yeah.
guess as we sort of sum up, I wonder what we've talked about this, and we've talked a lot about this in the spirit of adaptation. So we've looked at adaptations that failed. What do you think you want listeners or potential writers to get out of? Okay, now I know what Cinderella and Snow White for these two media companies failed to do. As I'm just sitting down to write my fairy tale adaptation, what do I need to keep in mind as I'm putting pen to paper or putting my fingers on the keyboard?
I'm going to tell you to go back to that metaphor that I talked about at the beginning of the house, of the what before you the metaphor and the three questions we talked about of what are the basic parts of the structure that you need, and then what is the emotional resonance that you want them to feel, and then what is the exigence for the story. Like you have to have those basic parts to it and work through those. I would say start with that. But secondly, and this is something that we've kind of hit on as we've been talking, and it's something that I deal with because I'm trying to recreate my romantasy workshops, is that you're looking for ways to balance that through line with the characters of how are we bringing their stories together? And the stories do need to come together. It doesn't have to be the most brilliant fit, but you do need it to align. And so you think about, okay, I have my heroine doing X, Y, and Z. What does that mean for how it fits in with the romantic plot? And because fairy tales are so beholden to have a romantic plot. If you have one, then you're thinking about how those things align. But if it doesn't, then you're thinking about what are the other relationships? How does it work with or against their motivations? How do we resolve these things in some kind of satisfactory way?
Oh, I'm gonna do this one thing, and gonna make you go, what are you thinking here, Margaret? I want to go back to that one idea where if you're trying to mix specifically redoing a fairy tale and you feel hemmed in by fairy tales usually end where the happy ever after is coded by two characters falling in love and marrying, more often than not, cis heteronormative. But even if you're adapting a queer fairy tale, the feeling that you have to end on, and they lived happily ever after, and it's implied they make children after, or they get married at a big kink ceremony. It's kind of that image that gets reinforced by all the Disney movies ending in like big marriages and things too, from the 90s, it's animated cartoon versions of fairy tales. I think one thing to do is you're saying like, okay, what is the part you're taking from the fairy tale, and what are the parts that you feel like you should take from the fairy tale but don't match with the story or the motivations you're telling? I.e., maybe it doesn't fit to have a big wedding at the end, like it really didn't for Cinderella.
You don't
So
have
how do you
to. I know
adapt that?
Disney has to, but
Yeah.
you don't have to have a romantic plot. Nightmares and Fairy Tales redoes Snow White, where she gets her heart cut out and she goes out into the forest and lives with the animals as comes zombie creature, and then comes back and kills the queen by stealing her heart. There's no prince in sight. You don't necessarily need that element to it. So if it doesn't fit for the story you're telling, get rid of it.
That's what I
But
was
if
gonna
you want it
say.
there, do something with it. Why
Be-
can't we have a Cinderella where she decides, oh, oops, I fell in love with the prince's sister?
Or I really do think that the way out of this is to help fix my kingdom, but later I'm gonna just be a shop owner for myself and enjoy that now I've helped other women get upward mobility. Like, but I choose, so to speak, me. I was saying that you were gonna think I was nuts because we had actually recently watched together the new, I know what you did last summer that came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I like it because I know it's very controversial for super plot points that are not relevant. I will not get into here. But I like that at the end, in this one, the two survivors from this new generation of cast are the two female best friends. Because you expect, well, the first one ends with Julie and Ray surviving. And usually, if someone besides the final girl survives, it's a boyfriend or someone who's come to rescue her, heteronormativity survives kind of thing. And I feel like this filmmaker is like, no, I really obviously was a fan of the original. I obviously really wished Helen Shivers, the secondary character, had survived. I think it'd be cool if at the time, at the end of this story, it's not, well, the final girl and her boyfriend survive and reconnect. It's no, these two final girls are both best friends and they're going to survive and be survivors going forward. And that's a shift, and that's not the expectation sometimes of especially a slasher movie. But I thought it was nice to say this is where I'm adapting it. This is where I'm going to make a deliberate change and say this is what I'm going to do around
Yeah.
convention. And I think that would have
Let me
fit Cinderella so much better to be like, yeah, she's supposed to get married, but we're telling the story of her becoming a business owner. Just make it match.
Let me toss out the one book, A Girl's Made of Snow and Glass. In that story, obviously, it's a Snow White retelling, but the focus is on the queen and Snow White and the things that they have had to deal with in, again, it's a patriarchal society, which means that them coming together means trying to unentrench themselves from these ideas that they have to fight each other. There is a slight romance, but Snow White's story isn't entirely focused on that. It's also, she's with a girl. But even if she were with a guy, it would be a side thing to the entire story. And so you can make the choice to, as you were talking about with the slasher film, you can make the choice of the heart of that to be a different relationship.
Yeah. I mentioned one other slasher, which is also not, which is very much not a good one. It's not even like a good one. It's a guilty pleasure of mine, but it's not good. I think I Know What You Did Last Summer, 2025 has its good points, and I would say it's a B plus movie. There you go. But this movie, the remake from 2005 of House of Wax, is objectively terrible. But what I do like is in that, throwing convention aside, saying actually we're going to pick a relationship to focus on that you don't usually expect for the survivors, is that the two who survive, the final girl and the other dude surviving at the end, are twins. So it's two fraternal twins who survive. The movie's a lot about doubling and mirrors and evil twins versus good twins. But again, you say maybe the relationship I want to focus on in my fairy tale retelling that's most important to me isn't a true love relationship, which is very common in fairy tales. Gosh, have we seen a lot of it because we're rewatching. Well, she's rewatching. I've never seen Once Upon a Time, the TV show, but I am now. But maybe you want to focus on a pair of friends, brother and sister, a parent and child who survive at the end of your fairy tale retelling. It really is driven by what is the core relationship you're trying to do? What is the function of the adaptation? Why are you telling it this way? And what ending and what type of relationship to promote and put first is the most important to you. And maybe it is a romance retelling, and that is great. But just make sure it matches with what you're overall also trying to do for your character's motivation and the way you want to tell this adaptation and what you're trying to do to put your spin on it. Because when you have that disconnect, which is in Snow White, but especially in Cinderella, where like her goal is girl boss and isn't involving a prince at all, and the prince's goal is I just want to get married to someone I love and I'm not forced to choose, they don't match, and there's no work done in the course of the film to make them match. It's confusing for the audience. So pick the relationship that, like the metaphor of the house, it's integral for you and your version of the fairy tale. It's still got to be a load bearing wall. It's still got to be part of the
Yeah.
foundation you're restructuring, and say, usually the Little Mermaid is about the relationship between the mermaid and the prince, and that's what I want to do. Awesome. But maybe you go and say, The Little Mermaid is really a story about a girl and her father, and at the end, I want to make sure that that reparation and that kind of coexistence is what I'm focusing on the most. Go from there. It's just, what do you want to pick and what do you want to get out of it dictates the way you remodel your house.
Yeah, because the reason that people keep coming back to these stories is the familiar, but for you, you think about what you want to write into it. And the relationship that's most important to you may be what you're genuinely contributing.
Yeah, and that was to bring it back to my noir twist on the fairy tale, was what was most interesting to me was I actually came back to, there is a romance subplot in it because it's a requirement of the anthology, but it wasn't the main gist of it. It was more about the heroine and her relationship to both her brother, and I wrote them in a third sibling, a sister, and like how to protect them from what their stepmother had done and sent them reeling from in the interim, and how to recover from that trauma. So to me, the sibling, in this case, siblings plural relationship, was more important as the touchstone and the thrust than overall any romantic relationships the female lead was going to end up in later. So again, it's all about making choices, and an adaptation succeeds both on recognizing what bones you have to keep and what bones will be worked into a better and new foundation that's uniquely yours. But by matching that with what you intentionally want to do and say and make the point of your retelling, and that some part of you really wants to do it. Like some part of you is motivated to say, they're part of the story I'm excited to tell, and I feel need to be told in my voice and with my spin. And the answer isn't cause cash. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's good. We'll see you all, as always, in a couple weeks down the road. Thank you so much for having another sit down with Other Lands Editing and learning a little bit more about fairy tale retellings. Thank you for joining the Otherlands Editing Podcast. Look for our next episode coming soon. And in the interim, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you want more information or want to connect, you can find Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss at our site, Otherlands Editing. Until next time, keep writing and keep refining your words.